Music is mathematics. It actually helps the analytical side of your brain.
It's been an incredible trip for my life. I want to thank the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for inducting this band finally.
At 77, Gregg Rolie is finally stepping into the spotlight. The founding force behind Santana and Journey, Rolie has long stayed quiet, letting his Hammond B3 speak louder than words. But now, in a rare twist, the man behind the music is breaking his silence. What did he really think of Steve Perry? Why now? This isn't about backstage drama or tired nostalgia. It's something deeper. His reflections are subtle yet piercing, and fans didn't see it coming. For decades, Rolie shaped the sound while others got the glory. Now, his voice is the one turning heads. What he shares may change how you see Journey and Rolie forever. Behind the harmony, something raw has been waiting to be heard. The musician's mind, emotional mathematics. Gregg Rolie's musical style didn't emerge from hardship, trauma, or a need to escape. It was shaped by stillness. Born in 1947 in Seattle, Washington, he grew up surrounded by a calm that allowed introspection to flourish. Unlike many musicians who found their voice through rebellion or chaos, Rolie's early years were steady and uneventful. This quiet environment offered space to reflect and listen, and over time, it shaped how he would approach music, not as a spotlight or performance, but as a language of subtle emotional truth. After his family relocated to Palo Alto, California, during his teenage years, Rolie found himself in a vibrant yet structured setting, a community grounded in optimism, education, and creativity. While others were immersed in trends or sports, he began teaching himself piano by ear, studying records by Ray Charles, Chuck Berry, and Bo Diddley. He never pursued elite instruction or formal training. Instead, he listened closely, repeatedly, and patiently. That habit of deep listening became central to his musical identity. It also explains why he gravitated toward the Hammond B3 organ, a complex instrument that fills space rather than dominates it. In fact, Rolie took on lead vocal duties in Santana and Journey, but never sang to try and outshine anyone in particular. His style tended to be balanced, usually grounded in music rather than ego. And it was the same with his keyboard work, where the organ acted almost like a non-soloist, providing a kind of emotional glue anchoring every song with tonal depth. Rolie was not after flash. He was after honesty. That mindset, formed in the quiet of his youth, allowed him to support his band's most ambitious sonic experiments while staying emotionally centered. Rather, the trip for Rolie can be considered a counter-narrative against the myth that pain is behind creative greatness. What if, after all, music could be created not from chaos, but from serenity? What if introspection, patience, and emotional discipline were as worthy antitheses of rebellion? Gregg Rolie's heritage would not have been drama. It would come from clarity, an art not demanding, but instead an art that demands emotional precision, a quiet commitment to saying more with much less. Indeed, reaching millions without having to shout. But to understand how that quiet foundation evolved, we have to look at where it all started and the unexpected environment that shaped his discipline. Quiet origins, the sound of stillness. Gregg Rolie's musical beginnings were shaped not by turmoil, but by tranquility. Born in 1947 in Seattle, a city known more for overcast skies and introspective energy than showbiz flash, Rolie grew up in an environment that allowed space to think and feel. His early years lacked the conflict often found in the biographies of rock icons. Instead of using music to process pain or chase escape, Rolie approached it as a slow, thoughtful discovery. The absence of drama didn't stunt his creativity. It gave him room to listen closely, to develop intention, and to explore sound as an extension of his inner world. When his family moved to Palo Alto, California, during his adolescence, Rolie entered a new setting of post-war optimism and suburban calm. Here, too, he remained introspective. While peers pursued sports or pop culture trends, he gravitated toward the piano. Rolie taught himself to play by mimicking records. Ray Charles, Bo Diddley, and Chuck Berry served as his unofficial teachers. Without access to formal training or elite music programs, he built his skills through repetition and immersion. His progress was quiet but consistent, driven not by a dream of stardom, but by an internal desire to understand music's emotional architecture. The type of musician Rolie was going to be was built on that foundation, and he was one not to go after the flash. Instead, he learned the most versatile and organic ways to help, merge, and raise a song without ever overpowering it. The instrument for him later turned out to be the Hammond B3 organ, which is certainly a choice indicative of that sensibility, as it fills space texturally rather than dynamically. The organ was a means to shape feeling, rather than a flashy stud. Even his vocals, especially on numbers like Black Magic Woman or Feeling That Way, were almost painfully grounded, more about the mood than the theatrics of it all. What he did was always in the service of the song, never himself. In retrospect, it is probably very easy to see how his early quiet origins played a part in his long-term influence. Others were caught up in throwing edge or spectacle, while he had forged precision in emotional impact. He did not make reactive music, it was reflective. Indeed, this very clarity was what would serve as the hallmark of the signature sound, allowing him to hold two legendary bands together without the need to control or dominate them. In an industry that thrives on extremes, the road that Gregg Rolie treads serves to remind us that the quieter a muse sounds, the louder its legacy becomes, and that, sometimes, the most reliable foundations on which to build timeless music lie in stillness. Anchoring the storm. When Gregg Rolie joined forces with Carlos Santana in the late 1960s, the two musicians were at very different ends of the creative spectrum. Santana was a guitarist driven by spiritual instinct and improvisational risk, while Rolie brought a structured sensibility shaped by years of careful, independent study. The combination proved powerful, not because they were aligned, but because they balanced each other. In the formative years of Santana, it was Rolie who served as the sonic and emotional anchor. His gritty, blues-inflected vocals and his commanding yet controlled Hammond B3 organ provided the backbone to a sound that might otherwise have spun off into formless experimentation. This role was especially evident during Santana's landmark performance at Woodstock in 1969. While Santana's searing guitar and the Latin percussion took the spotlight, it was Rolie's steady voice and haunting organ that stitched the chaos into coherence. Songs like Evil Ways and Black Magic Woman endure not just because of their guitar riffs, but because Rolie's keyboard phrasing and vocals carried an emotional directness that made the music feel grounded and accessible. His voice had a raw, lived-in quality, equal parts blues and rock, that cut through the swirl of psychedelic and Latin influences with something deeply human. Without Rolie, Santana may have had fire, but not shape. The dichotomy of Rolie and Santana extended right into the studios, where usually Rolie's imprint made a track concise and listener-focused. He believed in the arc of a song, the idea that music should build itself, then resolve, and leave an impression. Rolie advocated for the continuing rhythm, melody, and coherence, even as Carlos delved deeper into the more abstract forms and spiritual improvisational styles. Nothing about his approach said no to evolution. His concern was that the audience keep with the journey. It was that tension, creative rather than confrontational, that added a little bite to the band's early albums, especially Abraxas, 1970, which contained large themes balanced with very emotionally clear tones, many of which Rolie helped to shape. Rolie's ability to impose some order over chaos did not make you happen to be a very stiff cookie, but happened to be a must-have ingredient. He never grabbed the spotlight, but instead defined the band across its emerging years through his input. While Santana's guitar and Latin rhythms made the headlines, it was, of course, Rolie's musicianship that made those songs, in many cases, last. He wasn't just a sidekick, He was the heart and soul of early Santana, the factor that transformed experimental ideas into long-held anthems. His steady hand at this time wasn't to keep the band from soaring. It was to encourage that type of thing to happen. Rolie versus Santana's spiritual shift. As Santana's fame exploded in the early 1970s, so did Carlos Santana's interest in spirituality, Eastern philosophy, and avant-garde jazz. Influenced by his spiritual teacher Sri Chinmoy, Carlos began steering the band's music away from its Latin rock roots and toward abstract, improvisational forms. This shift created a subtle but growing philosophical divide between him and Gregg Rolie. Rolie, who had always approached music with emotional clarity and structure, felt the band was drifting from what made their sound impactful: melody, rhythm, and connection with the audience. This tension came to a head during the recording of Caravanserai, 1972, an album that marked a radical departure from the accessible grooves of Abraxas. With fewer lyrics and more atmospheric exploration, the record reflected Carlos's inner journey more than the band's collective voice. While critics praised its ambition, Rolie remained unconvinced. To him, music should move people, not just spiritually, but emotionally. He wasn't against evolution. He was against losing the heart of the music in the name of transcendence. As the sessions progressed, the band's unity began to fray. They were still playing together, but not really listening to each other anymore. Rolie later described the split as more philosophical than personal. There was no major fallout or dramatic feud, but a growing sense of distance. Carlos wanted to express his spiritual awakening. Rolie wanted the music to remain grounded in its original power. For Rolie, the band had started to feel less like a collaborative group and more like a vessel for one man's vision. He could no longer see himself in the direction the band was heading, and he didn't want to compromise just to stay. In 1972, Rolie quietly exited Santana. He didn't make a scene or issue a public statement. He simply recognized that the music no longer aligned with his values. His departure was a turning point, not just in his career, but in how he approached creative integrity. It wasn't about resisting change. It was about staying true to what music meant to him. While Carlos reached toward the cosmos, Rolie chose to stay grounded, and in doing so walked away from one of rock's biggest stages with his artistic purpose intact. The real reason Rolie left Journey. One of the longest-standing rumors about Gregg Rolie's departure from Journey is that it stemmed from conflict with Steve Perry. Many assumed the arrival of the powerhouse vocalist pushed Rolie out, but according to Rolie himself, that story is off the mark. In a 2023 interview, Rolie explained that he left not because of Perry, but because of himself. "I didn't like my life anymore," he said plainly. Perry, in fact, was a relief. "He could sing like a bird," Rolie added, appreciating that someone else could finally take on the vocal weight he had been carrying. By the late 1970s, Journey was on the brink of superstardom. Their sound was evolving rapidly, touring demands were intensifying, and expectations were mounting. Rolie, handling keyboards, vocals, and songwriting, was burning out. He admitted to drinking too much during that period, another signal that the fast-paced lifestyle was no longer working for him. He loved the music, but had stopped loving the life that came with it. What stands out is how quietly and respectfully he exited. There were no headlines, no dramatic exits. Rolie made the decision on his own terms and even helped guide his replacement, Jonathan Cain, into the fold. The symbolic passing of the Hammond B3 wasn't a gesture of defeat, it was one of stewardship. He recognized that Journey was heading into a new chapter and didn't feel the need to hold it back. Instead of clinging to his role, he stepped aside with grace. Rolie has never expressed bitterness about what Journey became without him. If anything, he's expressed pride. "Without me doing this," he once said, "that might never have happened." He valued what they built together, even if he wasn't part of its commercial peak. His exit reveals something rare in rock music: self-awareness over ego. Rolie left not because he was pushed out or overshadowed, but because he knew staying would compromise the authenticity that had always guided him. He chose personal clarity over public attention. In an industry where so many leave loudly, Rolie's quiet departure may be one of the most honest moves of his career. Just when most would have walked away for good, Rolie chose a different path, one that quietly shaped the band's future from behind the curtain. A mentor in the shadows. When Steve Perry joined Journey in 1977, it marked a pivotal moment in the band's evolution, a shift from progressive rock to a more melodic, vocal-driven sound that would eventually define their mainstream success. For many fans, this transition is remembered as the point when Perry's soaring tenor became the focal point of Journey's identity. But behind the scenes, it was Gregg Rolie who quietly ensured that this shift was as smooth and productive as possible. Rather than viewing Perry as a threat to his role, Rolie welcomed him. "He was a welcome sight to me," Rolie would later say, acknowledging that Perry's voice brought a new dimension to the band's music, and that the pressure of carrying both keyboard and lead vocal duties had taken its toll. Rolie's response to Perry's entrance stands in stark contrast to the ego clashes that so often plague rock bands during major lineup changes. Instead of resisting, Rolie acted as a guide, both musically and interpersonally. He helped Perry understand the band's rhythm, its unspoken dynamics, and its creative language. In doing so, he essentially bridged the gap between the original vision of Journey and the band's next chapter. His influence ensured that Perry's integration didn't fracture the group, but instead allowed them to reach a new, creative peak. Rolie's backing vocals, subtle keyboard layering, and studio insights remained vital even after Perry took center stage. During the making of Infinity, 1978, the first Journey album to feature Perry, Rolie played a central, if less public, role. He helped shape the album's arrangements, blending his blues and rock sensibilities with Perry's pop-driven melodies. Tracks like Lights and Wheel in the Sky are often viewed as Perry anthems, but Rolie's presence is embedded in the arrangements and emotional tone of the music. Instead of pushing against the band's evolution, Rolie leaned into it, contributing not by dominating, but by mentoring. This allowed Journey to evolve naturally, without the kind of creative fracture that derails many bands during transitional periods. Ultimately, Rolie's quiet leadership during this time reflects a deeper truth about his character. He understood when to lead and when to step back. His humility and foresight allowed Journey to flourish, even as his own role shifted. He didn't need to be the face of the band to be its foundation. In many ways, Rolie's most generous contribution to Journey was not the sound he created, but the space he made for others to thrive. His willingness to mentor rather than compete with Perry not only ensured the band's long-term success, but also preserved its creative integrity. It was a lesson in dignity, one rarely seen in the cutthroat world of rock music. Reinventing Life, offstage. After departing from Journey in 1980, Gregg Rolie made a decision that few successful musicians at the height of their careers ever seriously consider. He stepped away from the music industry, not out of scandal or failure, but by choice. For nearly 2 decades, Rolie largely disappeared from the mainstream spotlight. Unlike others who may have pivoted to solo careers or high-profile collaborations immediately, Rolie returned home to Austin, Texas, to focus on family and personal fulfillment. He traded tour buses for carpool lanes and stage monitors for the quiet hum of domestic life. In an industry where identity is often tied to public visibility, Rolie redefined success on his own terms. At the core of this shift was a desire to become the kind of father and husband he couldn't be while navigating the relentless schedule of a touring artist. He and his wife, Lori, raised 2 children, and during this period, Rolie took pride in ordinary moments, driving his kids to school, remodeling a garage into a music room, and even composing background music for Lori's children's audiobook series. Far from a retreat, this was a purposeful transformation, one that showed a different kind of courage. Rolie didn't abandon music, but he changed his relationship to it. He played not for contracts or charts, but for joy and presence. That kind of reinvention often gets overlooked because it isn't loud. yet it reveals something essential about Rolie's character. He was never driven by fame, but by the integrity of his experience with music. In interviews, he's spoken candidly about how being in Journey, despite the band's enormous success, eventually made him feel hollow. Choosing a quieter life allowed him to reconnect with music, not as performance, but as expression. The world didn't see the day-to-day of Rolie's post-Journey years, but it was here that some of his most meaningful work occurred, not in arenas, but in how he chose to live, love, and create on his own terms. Rolie's time away also serves as a subtle critique of the music industry's relentless demand for visibility. In a culture where stepping out of the spotlight is often interpreted as decline, Rolie demonstrated that a life outside of fame can be not only artistically valid, but personally redemptive. His decision to walk away and prioritize his family, mental health, and inner life is what makes his story uniquely grounded. While others chased reinvention through headlines, Rolie found his through stillness. And in doing so, he proved that stepping away doesn't have to mean giving up. It can mean finding yourself again, more honestly than before. The Storm and Beyond, quiet comebacks. Even after stepping away from the public spotlight in the 1980s, Gregg Rolie never fully stopped making music. Instead, he returned to it gradually and deliberately, with a renewed sense of freedom. His comeback wasn't marked by a headline tour or a major label push. It came through projects built on collaboration and joy, not commercial ambition. One of the most notable of these was The Storm. Formed in the early 1990s alongside former Journey bandmates Ross Valerie and Steve Smith. The band's debut single, I've Got a Lot to Learn About Love, reached the top 10 on Billboard's mainstream rock chart, an unexpected success for a group that wasn't chasing radio dominance. Rolie wasn't trying to reignite his fame, he was proving, quietly, that the music still mattered. The Storm reflected a kind of second life in music for Rolie, one where he could explore without pressure. The band's second album, Eye of the Storm, was unfortunately shelved due to shifting trends and label politics, particularly as grunge began dominating the rock landscape. But rather than see it as a setback, Rolie viewed the experience as a reaffirmation of his path, creating music for expression, not metrics. He remained unshaken by the industry's fickle nature. Instead, he turned toward older collaborators and new sounds, continuing to make music with those who shared his ethos. In 1998, by reuniting with the original Santana members, Michael Shreve and Jose Chapito Arias, Rolie formed Abraxas Pool. It was a musical and emotional reconciliation. The self-titled record of the band brought Rolie full circle, revisiting the Latin rock sound he helped define half a world away, but this time with far more perspective and far less internal struggle. This was not a band built for stadiums and charts. It was built on chemistry that would endure into shared musical language. To Rolie, this project, in a way, closed a chapter he used to think about with a fair amount of artistic tension. There were no frontman dramas, no label interference, just music for the fun of it. In conjunction with his band efforts, Rolie is also the recording artist of several solo albums, such as Roots, 2001, and Sonic Ranch, 2019, both of which bear a deeply personal fingerprint in connecting the artist with his art. These records did not rule the airwaves or make great splashes in pop culture, but that was never their intention. Their conception was on Rolie's terms and at his own time. The quiet candor of these albums chronicles his evolution as an artist and a person, one who had already played for the world and now was playing for himself. Throughout each phase of his comeback, always present was the one constant. Gregg Rolie never stopped being a musician. He simply stopped chasing the spotlight. Craft over celebrity. Gregg Rolie's entire musical journey stands in contrast to the model of fame that dominates much of the music industry today. He didn't build his legacy through image, theatrics, or self-promotion, but through musicianship, quiet, consistent, and deliberate. Unlike many of his peers who were driven by the spotlight, Rolie seemed more invested in the architecture of a song than in the spectacle around it. From his early days in Santana through his work with Journey and beyond, his approach prioritized arrangement, feel, and ensemble chemistry. He didn't strive to be a brand, he strove to be a musician. And that difference defined not only his output, but also his place in rock history. Rolie's career arc reveals an artist who refused to shape his identity around commercial trends. Even at the peak of Journey's popularity, when MTV and arena rock were redefining what it meant to be a successful band, Rolie remained grounded in the actual craft of music making. He often eschewed the limelight and let the music do the talking, something increasingly rare in a media-saturated culture. There are no tabloid scandals, no outrageous on-stage antics, and no public feuds that defined his public persona. In a field that often rewards excess, Rolie's restraint became his signature. His ability to fade into the background without losing musical authority was not a flaw. It was a form of mastery, modern template for fame. Even publicity handling and social net worth engagement outdo the music itself. Rolie did not put himself in viral moments or contour his career to suit the wants of the market. Instead, he gave his music his playing, either on the Hammond B3 or behind a mic as the message. Probably, this choice has kept his name a little less known than some of his peers to the average fan, but it has garnered him lasting respect among musicians and within the industry. He is the kind of artist whom other artists admire, not for what they project, but for what they build. Rolie is a classic example in many angles as he brings that idea into a musician's career, leaving celebrity behind. His legacy is that of lasting over the transient, occasionally making the important for the world to witness. Music was not always something that Rolie considered using to get attention. He saw it as a discipline of refining, respecting others, and sharing it. Thus, in contrast to younger musicians today, Rolie manages to have about all of that. Perhaps a rare, refreshing, never from a reel to burning, loudly distinction that still has relevance in creating a legacy where attention is not a background score for all musicians. Even in an industry addicted to flash, Rolie's quiet presence left footprints too deep to ignore, especially when the spotlight finally circled back. A pioneer without a pedestal. Gregg Rolie's double induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, first with Santana in 1998 and again with Journey in 2017, is a rare achievement. But even more remarkable is the understated way he accepted this recognition. Unlike many of his peers who used the honor to relive old glories or settle scores, Rolie kept his remarks and his presence measured. For him, the awards didn't serve as validation of personal fame, but as acknowledgments of the musical blueprints he helped lay down. His influence was never about dominating a spotlight. It was about creating something solid enough for others to build on. And both bands did exactly that, continuing to evolve even after Rolie moved on. What makes Rolie's legacy so unique is how foundational yet unassuming it is. He wasn't the loudest member in Santana or Journey, but in both groups, he was the one who laid the emotional and musical groundwork. Whether through the moody swells of the Hammond B3 organ in Santana's early hits, or the structured elegance he brought to Journey's transition toward mainstream rock, Rolie's role was always structural. He didn't just contribute to hit songs, he helped define the sound that made those songs possible. His legacy isn't tied to one moment, one album, or one signature hit. It's embedded in the DNA of two genre-defining bands. He remains associated in the current time, Rolie being much known by the mainstream as a musician, for instance, and possibly that alone is how he prefers. His name is never there on merchandise, nor would it resurface endlessly in the retrospectives of classic rock. But musicians and most serious fans would have it nearer to an almost sacred reputation. There is a silent reverence for how other artists speak of Rolie, not as a rock god, but as a craftsman. Career in such instances reminds us that the most influential people in sound are those who never shout for attention, but without them, might leave a noticeable void. The early Santana feel and the sound structure of Journey might never have crystallized the way they did without him. To summarize, Rolie's legacy isn't musical, but personal. Primarily, he made a point that keeping pristine, calm, clear consistency, and indeed, absence of noise was possible for everyone to leave footprints in this world, which appears to equate recognition with noise. His double honors in the Hall of Fame are not for celebrity, but for contribution. While he may never have chased the pedestal, his place in rock history is unshakable. Not because he demanded it, but because he earned it quietly, honestly, and without compromise. That, in itself, might be the loudest message of all. If that gave you a whole new perspective on Gregg Rolie, just wait. There's more where that came from. What do you think about what he revealed? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read every one. Don't forget to hit that like button if you felt the honesty in this story, and smash subscribe if you want more behind-the-scenes truths that don't make the headlines. And hey, don't stop here. Click the next video on your screen now to keep the journey going.